So welcome, everybody. For those who I don't know, though I know everybody on this call, my name is Rabbi Mark Katz, Rabbi here at Temple near Tamid. And I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you. When Bud came to me maybe 2 weeks ago and said, look, there's a lot going on right now on these campuses, and the real experts are our teens. Is there a way to leverage some of our teens to basically teach our community about what they're seeing, what they're feeling on these college campuses? I thought it was a great idea. And we're really blessed with three amazing college students today who are going to talk about their experience. So in just the order of my screen, we have Sophie Saraski, who is at Dartmouth. We have Jesse Felder-Pfaff, who is at Rutgers. And we have Nick Baum, who is at Columbia. And as you know, each of these three schools have kind of a really important story to tell. And if I were to kind of pick a cross-section of three schools right now, these three might be the three schools. And we're lucky enough that when we were thinking about really thoughtful teams, we happen to have three of them at those schools. Columbia being really the locus of the protests, right? The kind of catalyst for it. Rutgers being our local community, but also the community that many of us are talking about because Rutgers, along with a few others, is known for kind of making concessions to the protests in a way some of the other schools haven't. And so the decision around that, the fallout around that. And Dartmouth is a fascinating story. For a very long time, they actually managed to avoid some of these protests, in part because the kind of feeling among the kind of Jewish world was that Dartmouth was getting free speech right, and so there was no need for it in the way. And then the protest happened. They cracked down very quickly on the protest, and the faculty just censured the president like 2 days ago. And so it also has a very interesting history to it. And something for us to talk about. And so really, they're the experts. We're going to hear from them. And so I'm going to turn it over to our master interviewer, Bud Mishkin, who has done many of these talks for us in the past and is known for really thoughtful questions and keen insights. And so without further ado, Bud Mishkin. So he's on mute.
Here we go. Rookie mistake. Thanks, Rabbi, and thanks for the platform, and thanks being open to the idea. And thank you all for joining us, and especially our three students. I would say that usually when it comes to talking about college, I would like my alma mater, University of Pennsylvania, to be part of the conversation, but in reading about what's been going on campus, I was happy when Penn was not involved, and then when it was involved, and certainly with the college president. Well, anyway, that's the discussion for another time. Thanks to the three of you. Sophie, you're still on campus, as I understand. So let's start with you. Basically, it's a blank sheet of paper for us. What's your experience been like on campus? What is it like right now, still being on campus?
So I was abroad in the fall. I was in Edinburgh, Scotland, and so when October 7th happened, I wasn't in the country. So I can't really speak to the campus climate when sort of this all came to a head, but I was at the protest where 90 students and faculty were arrested, and can say that the atmosphere there was just insane, very sad and dystopian, and I can sort of talk more about that later, but I think campus has definitely been reeling since then. That protest was on May 1st, so just the general atmosphere on campus has been a little bit unsteady, maybe is a good word for it, like faculty and students alike, as well as our president, President Bylock. No one seems quite sure the best way to move forward because there was this one big protest that was so immediately and quite violently cracked down upon. So in terms of the feeling of how to safeguard free speech on campus while ensuring safety, I think that everyone seems to feel a little bit at a loss there. But I would also say that Dartmouth is in the middle of the woods. It's a tiny campus. Um, like the weather just got nice outside. And so it's very easy to be sort of apolitical or to, in the moment, move on from what's happening in the larger campus environment and just focus on things like school and jumping in the river and things like that. And so people, I think, largely, again, are unsure how to move forward, but are able to kind of distract themselves easily. And there hasn't been an overly like political feel on campus, and you can kind of opt in and opt out as you see fit.
When you were at that protest, were you there observing? Were you part of the protest? And you say, I think the word you use is unsteady. How does that manifest itself on campus right now?
Well, as Rabbi Katz said, the faculty just censured our president. The students voted no confidence in her as well last week, I think. And so people are people are not happy with our administration at the moment.
Hmm.
Um, I was at the protest as an observer. It took place on the Dartmouth Green, which for anyone who hasn't been to Dartmouth is basically this big, well, like field green, in the very center of campus. And yeah, I was standing on the outskirts just there as an observer. But what's crazy is that Dartmouth is such a small school that I heard somebody leading, excuse me, a protest chant, and I was like, I know that's my friend because I recognize her voice. And so I think that there are two levels to what has happened at Dartmouth. There's the political level. A lot of what was said at this protest is things that I personally don't want to be saying. Like, I'm not ever going to be chanting things like from the river to the sea. But there's also a personal people level to what happened. And I like stood there and watched as a line of state troopers in riot gear arrested my friends. Um, and so again, yeah, it feeds into this whole unsteady atmosphere on campus that we'll see. We'll see what happens next.
Jesse, tell us what your experience has been like at Rutgers.
Uh, yeah, so overall, it's been kind of, I guess I've sort of just tried to remove myself from the whole thing. Like, for example, when October 7th happened, maybe for like a day or two, everybody was sympathizing with Israel, and then it very quickly, that very quickly went away. We started seeing a lot of the protests against Israel, and the first couple was just kind of like I was, I guess, disturbed because every there was everybody, like most of the people in the protest, I think, would claim that it was not anti-Semitic, but it did definitely feel like there were anti-Semitic undertones when they were saying like such terrible things about a Jewish state. You know, there's definitely some connection there. Um, but at the same time, I never felt uncomfortable as a Jew on campus because there's such a large Jewish community. Like I've worn this shirt multiple times throughout this year openly, and I've never had a problem. Like not even anyone's giving me a dirty look or anything. Because I think the reason why is because there's a strong enough Jewish community and enough rules against anti-Semitism that nobody would. I mean, the people at the protest when the encampment started a few months ago were all hiding their face. Like nobody would go out in public with their face unhidden and harass me for wearing this shirt because they know better. So part of that is just sort of that definitely made me feel more secure on campus. I have plenty of Jewish friends. Um, I went to Hillel to go to services, not every week, but sometimes, so I could feel a sense of community there. Um, yeah, I would just kind of I would walk by the protests and sometimes be like, yeah, this makes me a little uncomfortable, but I mean, it never really I don't think they really ever got violent. It's just kind of people saying stuff that I didn't feel comfortable with. But I just mostly decided to instead of sort of letting it live rent free in my head, I just kind of focused on my studies and um just tried to walk past it. I didn't really involve myself in any of the counter protests because productive. They didn't really seem to encourage any discourse between people or hearing anybody out. It was just people sort of yelling things at the protesters, which I didn't find helpful at all. I don't think that's gonna make the situation any less tense. If anything, it's the opposite.
Mhm.
So I thought the best thing to do would just kind of not let it get to me and just understand that there's enough of a Jewish community at Rutgers that, and that, like most of us were kind of doing the same thing, just not letting it get to us, just going to services as normal, wearing the shirt out as normal, and we were fine, you know. So
Right.
that's basically how I felt.
Nick, Columbia has become, for want of a better term, ground zero of the encampments and the protests, and has gotten a ton of attention. And we can talk about that in a bit. But again, your personal experience, what has it been like for you? And has the feeling, we're now talking about 6, 7 months here, is there any change in the feeling on campus from the fall to the spring to the establishment of the encampment?
Well, I think ground zero really is the best term you can attribute to Columbia University because even a mere 5 days after October 7th, what we saw in the middle of Columbia's campus, right in front of the main library, was indicative of the tension and division that would basically define campus for like the ensuing 6 and 7 months, and may frankly continue to define campus culture come next year. And that was on October 12th. What you had was, so there's two lawns right outside of the main library, separated by a walkway. And occupying one lawn was a group of pro-Palestine protesters in keffiyehs, waving the Palestinian flag, and regurgitating the same few chants that we've heard time and time again throughout basically every university. And then on the other hand, you had a pro-Israel faction holding hostage flyers, waving Israeli flags. Interestingly enough, the vast majority, I would go so far as to say, of the former camp, of the pro-Palestinian camp, was wearing masks, was trying to conceal their identity. Only a thin minority, if I don't even think for that matter I could really identify anybody in the pro-Israel camp that was actively trying to conceal their identity. And so this scene of visible hostility and division is basically indicative of everything else that would come at Columbia. And so I must say, I'm very happy for you, Jesse, that because of the very large Jewish community at Rutgers, you feel comfortable, you feel safe. But Columbia is the most Jewish Ivy League school. About 20 to 25% of the school is Jewish. I go to Hillel or Chabad every single week. Yet I have continued to feel not only uncomfortable, but I would say at certain moments downright unsafe on campus. And on the one hand, I think it's okay to be uncomfortable on campus. Sometimes it might be even necessary to be uncomfortable at a university where you hear opposing ideas, where you engage with those that strongly disagree with you. That's a good thing. That's something that fuels the learning process. That's something that the university should be inspiring. But to feel unsafe on campus, to have people originating from all corners of New York City outside of the gates of your university chanting things like Yehudim go away, go back to Poland, we'll repeat October 7th 10,000 times. There's a laundry list of horrible anti-Semitic vile that has been spewed both outside the gates of campus by outside agitators, from my own fellow classmates inside the gates of campus, including signs saying by any means necessary, one person running around yelling kill the Jews, and these are simply the most flagrant, undeniably anti-Semitic occurrences on campus. That isn't even precluding, though, as Rabbi has said before, the sort of dog whistle chants, including, from the river to the sea.
So for you, Nick, what are the more subtle microaggressions, maybe the expression is, that you've experienced in the 6 or 7 months?
I've never been the most firm believer in such a term, microaggressions, only because oftentimes, yes, I will take offense to these words and chants. Oftentimes, I don't necessarily fault the speaker too much because they might not necessarily know. And that includes from the river to the sea, and even the way that these protesters are normalizing the term intifada. We're living in a campus culture where we can't even agree on the same definitions whatsoever. We have different definitions of what from river to the sea means. we hold different notions of what the Intifada means. And not only that, but a recent post from the Students for Justice in Palestine group within Columbia, they issued their own "What is Zionism" sort of infographic, and it holds a completely different definition from what I, as a proud Zionist, actually believe what it means. On the one hand, I simply believe that it means Jews have a right to their ancestral homeland in the state of Israel. But the way they define it, they immediately go, and this is like a complete paraphrase, but they call it an ethno-nationalist ideology that seeks to remove any indigenous peoples from the land of Palestine. And I think when we occupy a campus culture where we can't even agree on the same definition, then yeah, we'll be fighting two completely different battles, and that doesn't benefit anybody. That only hurts and further divides people and creates the unsafe environment that we've seen at Columbia right now at the moment. So yes, while I take great offense to many of the subtle individual things that these protesters say, it is the product of a campus culture where we're unable to have a conversation, where we're unable to have the basic humility to at least attempt to understand where people are coming from and why they have the beliefs that they have. And it's very sad to see at such a purportedly elite institution of higher education that students don't have this nuance, don't have the humility to engage in these ideas.
Sophie, how about at Dartmouth? I'm always fascinated by the conversations that happen away from the limelight, and if we want to equate the limelight with being at a public protest, either being part of that protest or observing, are there discussions? Is there civil discourse for you with friends, with people who maybe just classmates who you don't know, but are those discussions happening, or have they happened, where different opinions are thrown back and forth, and there might actually be some learning about each side's point of view? Have those conversations for you, since you've been back from Edinburgh, have those conversations happened at Dartmouth?
Yeah, I found personally that, I feel lucky that I have friends who are interested in talking about this, who want to engage in a productive and respectful way. I also think, again, because Dartmouth is so isolated, this notion that to be able to just sit back and talk about the merits feels like a almost disrespectful word, but for lack of a better word in this moment, the merits of either side, or what sides even means here. To be able to do that, sort of, we're really lucky that that's what we're able to do. And I think that our environment, again, living in the middle of the woods is just very strongly juxtaposed with living in a war zone. And so I think that perhaps environmentally, not living in a city, for example, maybe that lends itself to just having more space for more productive discourse. I will say that that I've personally found that I can talk with my friends about this. I also think that the voices that are the loudest on campus, and generally speaking, obviously, are the most radical. And so there has been some amount of things that I or my Jewish friends have found to be anti-Semitic that have been said. There's also been I have a really good friend who's the president of Chabad, who wrote a letter to the editor for the Dartmouth, which is our student newspaper. And there's a student platform called Fizz, which is kind of just an online gossip platform. And people called her out by name and said some really hurtful and disrespectful things. And so the circles that I've been engaged in, which maybe have been more seemingly interested in nuanced stances in the first place, there's been able to be productive discourse, but I don't think that universally applies on Dartmouth's campus. I've just found that to be my experience.
That notion at Dartmouth that they were getting this right for a long time, do you think that made the reaction, that's a phrase that's been thrown around, do you think that made the reaction, or what's going on right now, even more intense? Because there is that, as you explain it, or as you describe it, there is that environment of people being able to talk to one another about different points of view. But now this protest happened, and and now there's controversy as far as the president is concerned. Do you think the reaction in the last 3 weeks is based on what you saw as far as your campus versus other campuses prior to that?
Um, I mean, so it's interesting that Dartmouth has this outward, that there's this outward perception that Dartmouth has gotten it right in many ways, because I would say, again, I was not here for all of it, but within the student body, I think there has frequently been the opinion that our administration has gotten it wrong when it comes to handling student issues. And in addition to things that are directly related to the Israel-Hamas war, there's also been like our new president came in, and then there was a lot of like anti-student union. So there just have been a lot of sort of feeling that our new administration is more anti-student than the last. And so again, interesting just as a foundational point that the external perception has been Dartmouth has gotten it right. I think that there's been a very dramatic reaction to the administration's response to the May 1st protests that happened at Dartmouth, in part because we felt that the response, I mean, let me not speak for everyone. I felt, as did many others, that the response by the administration, which again brought in state troopers in riot gear who arrested 90 students, which you have to remember is 2% of the Dartmouth student population. So, okay, 90 students and faculty, but that in terms of student numbers is a huge percentage just because we're so small. And that response felt like maybe it would be necessary to preserve safety at a school like Columbia, where there has been so much more sort of violence or unrest initiated by the protesters themselves. But in the case of Dartmouth, having been at this protest, I felt that I had to, it was a very strange feeling. I felt that I was not part of the protest, but felt in some way that I couldn't leave because I had to bear witness to the violence that I felt was taking place against my community. So again, that comes back to this difference between the political and the personal level. But that being said, this violence, I think, was really perpetrated by the police who came in at the request of the administration and not by the protesters themselves. And so I think that that is part of why the student and faculty response to the administration's move here was so strong, because it just felt that this response was totally not warranted for what occurred.
Nick, we've talked already about the juxtaposition of a campus in New Hampshire and a campus in New York City, and what role that may play in this story, this incredibly compelling story that's been going on for certainly during the spring with the encampments. And you referred to it when you first started talking in terms of the protests, quote unquote, inside campus, and the people who are hanging out, and that's clearly not the right phrase to be using, just outside campus. But as someone who has been on that campus and near that campus numerous times, there's no subtlety there. The notion of being on 116th and Broadway, and then, oh, now we're inside the campus, and you can tell because you can see the library. Well, it's about 15 yards difference. Has there been any differentiation between, okay, I'm in campus now, on campus, and I'm near the encampment, and being outside, being near the gates, and what you hear? I guess my question is, in a long roundabout way, is there any differentiation between what you hear or the feeling you have around the protests inside and the anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic stuff that you've seen outside the gates?
No, and I think that I don't see much of a distinction between the two, and that is a assessment of my own safety and my own comfort on campus that I think those that disagree with me have to at least reconcile with. That because of the laundry list, the barrage of different instances of anti-Semitism right outside, as you said, literally physically outside the gates of 116th and Broadway and 116th in Amsterdam, that when you have these outside agitators, if you will, when you have people coming in from all corners of New York City and beyond, and then calling to arms these horrible chants that incite violence against Jews, and Columbia as the small sort of gated community, if you will, within Morningside Heights, when you have those protesters not only surrounding the main entrances, but then deliberately circling and surrounding any available entrances to campus that there are. I mean, that was the case with what we saw for Accepted Students Weekend, for example, that the Accepted Students festivities, that was on an entrance on 114th and Broadway, a very small, minute little entrance. And of course, as I walked past, I saw a huge sort of army of protesters surrounding that one little entrance. And same thing when for a day, the only entrance was on another small entrance. The only entrance to campus was another small little gate on 117th. Again, I saw a huge sort of clamor of protesters surrounding that one little gated entry where I had to use my ID card, show it to the security officer, a team of security officers that definitely felt very unused and very unsafe by the whole situation. And so when your campus is essentially surrounded by a massive group of protesters almost on a 24/7 basis, when a number of them are making downright horribly anti-Semitic claims and chants and so forth, and there's a failure to condemn them, then of course you're going to feel unsafe as a Jew, both outside of campus, certainly, but even inside campus, tucked away, even with security, even with students who claim that their intentions are pure, that look, here, there's Jewish people protesting with us. That distinction falls apart when you have people calling for Jews to go back to Poland and for Jews to get killed 10,000 times over 15 feet away from you, as you said, on campus. And so it is very interesting because if there's one place where you can distract yourself, it's probably New York City. But to see it, as you said again, become ground zero here at Columbia University, I think it's indicative of just how passionate these protesters are in making their claim in spite of their obviously very flawed sense of information on the matter.
Nick, another thing for you, and Jesse, we'll get to you in 1 second, and that is the same question as I asked Sophie. Obviously, with Columbia, we are reading about it, we are seeing it, we are hearing about it on the radio in terms of what is happening there. But again, away from the limelight, so to speak. And you kind of answered this in your first answer, but I'm curious, are there any discussions with people without other people watching about different points of view, or has the overall feeling that you've described environment you described at Columbia kind of just negated any kind of one-to-one conversation in a dorm room over a cup of coffee at a chance meeting on campus?
Oh, it's been thoroughly negated. And I mean, to be fair, universities have negated sort of free speech, intimate dialogue, actually nuanced sort of debate back and forth for a number of years. But I think to a certain extent, this is the culmination of it, wherein if you feel so passionately about a certain issue, your self-righteosity compels you to not even try to debate or to speak or to have discussions with those that disagree with you, even if their beliefs are informed by something so personal and dear to them as religious beliefs, such as I and many other Jews. And I think we see that because the rhetoric that a number of these protesters are adapting is that we don't want to, quote unquote, normalize the violence and genocide that's going on in Israel. And that by talking to those that disagree with us, by talking to those that may be Zionists, quote unquote, then we'd be normalizing what's going on. And so what the university attempted to do, a purportedly Dartmouthian way of trying to resolve the situation, if you will, was they tried to host a day of dialogue between Columbia and Barnard, where basically students would gather around, they would hear from a number of different experts on the issue, experts that disagree with each other, so that some supporting the Israel cause, some supporting the Palestine clause, insofar as they could possibly diverge. And then from there, students would engage in intimate, smaller-sided discussions and dialogues and try to reconcile their differing beliefs. And so Columbia Apartheid Divest, which is like the main overarching coalition that encompasses Students for Justice in Palestine, Jewish Forces for Peace, and so forth, they boycotted the event. Not only did they boycott it and call for others to boycott it because it, quote unquote, normalized the whatever they thought was going on the other side of the world, but they actively tried to disrupt it. There was a number of them outside the hall where it was taking place, where they kept on yelling, bringing signs, trying to throw chants, and they actively tried to disrupt this attempt at hosting dialogue. And so I think what we're seeing at Columbia right now is probably indicative of a much wider trend at university, wherein if a student feels so passionate enough about an issue, they feel inclined to silence others about it, and they feel self-righteous enough to not even adopt the basic humility of trying to discuss with somebody who disagrees with them. So I see zero attempt at any attempt at dialogue, at discussion, at debate. There's none of it whatsoever. None.
All right. I will say that you are, I believe, the first person I've ever heard use the phrase Dartmouthian. And that's pretty cool. I like that. Dartmouthian. I love it.
I'll coin the term.
No, that's good. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. Jesse, at Rutgers, again, I'm fascinated by this, so I want to hear your take on this in terms of personal interactions. Nobody's watching, there's no camera, there's no microphone, there's no reporter from the college paper or from any other paper. Have you been able to have those conversations with people, thoughtful? Maybe you learn something from the other side, they learn something from you, whatever side you're on. Or are those conversations not happening?
So the first thing I'm gonna say is like I totally I see where Nick is coming from with the lack of dialogue thing. Like I always thought a big problem is that no one's really willing to hear each other out. And I think I think that's just kind of that's and yeah, that is universal when people are very like passionate about issues. You get so wrapped up in your own beliefs, you become sort of unwilling to accept that maybe your perception is off, which I think could be a big problem. Um, Rutgers, I think there might have been. I actually I didn't really pay too much attention to if they were doing dialogue type events or not, but in most of the time I didn't really talk to other people about this, except there is one person. It's actually very interesting. So I met somebody in one of my classes, I think last semester, who he's a bit older. He's like 27 and he's from Israel. He served in the IDF for a couple of years, I think 3 years. And once he was done, he came to the US, like started a business, and he's using that money to pay for college. But anyway, this is I was able to kind of make friends with an actual Israeli who'd served in the IDF, so I was able to talk with him about it. And his take on it is something that he said to me once that I actually agree with a lot, is that college students like to be radical. Like they will, like everybody wants to pick one side and like stick to it and cheer on it like it's a football team or something. But that in reality, it's a lot more nuanced than that, and that you can't really because and it's really cool to hear that coming from him because he was there. He's not talking about the other side of the world. This is the place where he was born. He's seen this stuff happen. He had friends who died on October 7th. And so he's very personally connected to this. So being able to talk about it with him, I feel like really got me. I was able to sort of maybe just like understand it a little bit better, like being able to talk with somebody who's an Israeli, who served in the Israeli army and who sort of he knows the situation on a level that I'd say most of the protesters probably don't. Um, and he basically said that neither like there were some counter protesters, and he still doesn't really think that they're completely getting it. Like you can't really cheer on one side like it's a sports team, but he's seeing these younger college students, a lot of them are younger than him, right? He's 27, and he's seeing this and saying that people are way too quick to just start picking their side, cheering for it like it's basketball or something, instead of really looking at the facts and sort of analyzing the situation. And I think that's a big problem. Like people just want to. I feel like they kind of in a sort of sick way kind of find it fun to just go out and like protest stuff and and yell things, and they don't really know what they're saying, and I don't think they really care. Um, and that does kind of disturb me. It's because a lot of what they're saying is very harmful. Like there are people chanting from the river to the sea. I've seen some videos online. Most of them don't even know what the river is.
Hmm.
So that kind of, you just see you see that type of stuff, and you question, do these people actually believe this, or do they just kind of find it fun to almost role play in such a way? And it's almost a little bit amusing in a dark way. That's kind of how I cope with it personally. But yeah.
Uh, I went to college from 1977 to 1981, before there was practically electricity, and and it was a rather, I think, in conjunction in conjunction with the late 60s and early 70s, and certainly what we're seeing now. It was a rather apolitical time, at least on campus, at least at my campus. And I know that studying for me was kind of a full-time job. At least that's how I felt about it. So the notion of being involved, or at least thinking about and seeing each day a story that became, and rightfully so, the lead story across the country, college protests, the juggling of those two. Hey, I have a life to lead. I got classes and I'm doing these extracurricular things, but also, Jesse, we'll start with you. Have you experienced that effort to need to balance both taking care, of your studies and whatever else you're doing on campus, and also being at least connected to and having feelings about and discussing what's going on in terms of the protests?
Yeah, so I was very much a student first during all of this. I had tough classes, a lot of homework, a lot of exams to prep for, and because I'm, in the engineering program, so that kind of that gives it's a lot of homework, a lot of, as the exams are tough. And so was the person who I mentioned who's from Israel. He was also in the engineering program, and he's in a lot of my classes. I'd say like 90 to 95%, probably closer to 95% of what we talked about was what did you get for number three, or how did you do how do you do this type of problem? Um, and like the whole Israel thing, we talked about it like once in a blue moon, just because both of us were just so wrapped up in our studies. And that's kind of how I focus. Like the whole encampment that picked up during finals week. And as I walked past that encampment, I was just I was more worried about my differential equations exam than I was about the encampment at the time. Just because, as I said, there's enough of a Jewish community at Rutgers that, and not even just enough of a Jewish community, but like there's not really any outright anti-Semitism, just the dog whistle stuff. And I just kind of gotten maybe used to it, a little desensitized to it. And most of the time I was able to just kind of worry about exams. I didn't really deal with counter protesting because I didn't find that really productive either. A lot of the counter protests I also found a little bit absurd. Like for example, there's like this story of a woman who got a picture posted in her dorm, a Jewish woman who got her who has a pro-Israel protest, who got her picture put up in the dorm. Everybody was shocked about that. And I was actually kind of really appalled at first. And then I and then I saw the picture and the sign she was holding, and I was kind of like, not that I think it's justified to put someone's pictures up in the dorm, but she was holding a sign that said "Hot girls support Israel." And I thought that was probably the dumbest sign I'd ever seen in a while, and I did not want to be associated with that. That said, I mean, yeah, you don't put posters of someone up in their dorm. That's really creepy and weird. But at the same time, like it's the same thing. Like you're cheering it on like it's a sports team or something. Like this is this is like foreign politics. This is a war. Like take it more seriously.
Right.
Is kind of what I've found. But I didn't have the kind of time to do a bunch of research on this. So I kind of mostly just shrugged it off and focused on my academics because I don't have time to be like studying the nuances of this war. Like I just got to study for my exam. That's kind of my stance on it.
For the record, what did you get for number three?
I don't remember. I probably figured it out eventually.
Well, we'll just assume that you got it right, okay?
I probably got it right.
Yeah, there you go. Sophie, at Dartmouth, we talked about the conversations that are happening. How about conversations, again, private ones, not ones if there were cameras there or reporters or whatever. How about conversations between Jewish students and Jewish students of different opinions? Was that part of the experience at all?
Yeah, I mean, I have not personally been part of many intra-Jewish conversations about this. Um, but I've had some friends who've been in various environments. Like my sorority has a like sub group chat of the Jewish members of the sorority, and they all had a breakfast that I like couldn't go to because of, I don't know, a scheduling conflict. And I heard from a friend who was there that sort of the most extreme views are often, I mean, again, as is the case within wider society, most extreme views are the ones that are the loudest and often the most on display. And her words were that she felt uncomfortable. She felt more uncomfortable being a Jew in a space of Jewish peers than in just the wider campus environment, which I think was an interesting inversion on what you would typically think of when you're thinking about senses of community, broadly speaking, even. Um, and so, yeah, so it's not really something that I can personally speak to, again, because it's not a thing that I have been super involved in terms of having conversations about the Israel-Hamas war with an intra-Jewish community. But yeah, I think that that general pattern of sort of more extreme views are the ones that are made more vocal, seems to have been on display there as well. I will say that I randomly, it's actually not connected to the fact that there's a war going on at all, but I have not really been involved in Jewish life at Dartmouth campus, but this term I'm doing a Jewish learning fellowship. It's called Life's Big Questions. And so I meet with a group of Jewish students and the Hillel rabbi at Dartmouth once a week, and every week has a different theme, and we just talk about whatever the theme is. So things like happiness, purpose. We had one on Shabbat and like the notion of rest. There was one on intimacy. There's one, I don't know, lots of different topics. And I found that we haven't been discussing the war, but it has been nice, I've thought, to just have a sense of Jewish life on campus in a way that's completely apolitical this term. So
You think you look at it like as a safe space?
um no, not really. It's
Okay.
more, it's just been like fun because my Jewish community, aka Near to Mead, is a thing that I was very involved in high school and a thing that I kind of lost coming to college. And again, it for me has not been connected to the war at all, getting more involved, but just as a kind of random occurrence that I happen to come back to campus and then get involved in this thing. I've just found that being part of a Jewish space is a thing that I almost hadn't realized that I missed. And so it's been nice to come back to that in that way.
I hope you told them that this class about, was it life's biggest questions? Is that the phrase
That's
you
big
used?
questions, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I hope you told them that, well, we answered all that back at Temple Ner Tamid. We
Of
got
course.
that. We got that covered. One more thing for you, Sophie, and that is you had an international experience of this during your fall semester in the absolutely beautiful Scottish city of Edinburgh. Uh, what was that experience like after October 7th, as you were talking to students, and kind of what was the environment like for you and in general after October 7th at school in Edinburgh?
Um, I would say that, so I was in Edinburgh on I'm a religion minor, and so I was in Edinburgh on the religion study abroad program with around 15 other Dartmouth students, and we were kind of all dispersed throughout the city. And it was just, as most study abroad experiences are, very new, very whatever, you try to immerse yourself in your like sort of new and temporary life as much as possible. And so I found that I just had a very small community that I was surrounded by. I had probably 6 friends who I hung out with regularly. And so that in and of itself, like had we just had I mean, again, it's very lucky to be able to say this, but we had other things that we were more focused on than
Right.
having nuanced like dialogue about a very serious and complicated political issue. Um, and so I would say it was, of course, so incredibly upsetting and scary and just really like discombobulating, is maybe a word that describes it. I don't know, all of the emotions that probably many Jewish individuals and Jewish Americans were feeling, I think I felt too. And then I felt maybe far from home and far from community, but because of that, I immersed myself in the community I had, which was very rooted in the fact that I was in Edinburgh trying to experience as much there as I possibly could. And so in some ways it was a good distraction. But again, it's like what a privilege to be able to say that.
Yeah. Nick, one more thing for you from me, and then I'm going to hand this back to Rabbi Katz with a few more questions and to bring this to an end. And Nick, that is clearly you've been through an experience. I mean, that's an understatement from what you've spoken of, and I think all of us here on the call and people who will watch this have been reading a lot about what I know I have about what's been going on all around the country and seeing a lot and being in the media myself, part of it. But that's why I always want to hear from people who are actually there, to what their experience is. And I could talk to other people who are there who might have a different experience, but that's okay. That's for another time. So my question to you is, first of all, is your semester over at this point?
Baruch Hashem, yes, it is.
Well, I think you just answered the question. That notion of, even after all you've said, now have you been able to exhale a little bit and kind of like, I've been through something here, and kind of not analyze, but again, kind of exhale from going through it, and how much are your thoughts about returning in the fall?
I am still completely set on returning in the fall. I think from what I've heard, there are definitely a fair number of students who have at least considered transferring away from Columbia, some of which have actually decided in transferring from Columbia altogether. These are all mutual friends, though. Fortunately, nobody within my support network, my support group, my Jewish sort of community has necessarily entertained that thought, and that is really for the better. But I think you put it best. I really have been able to exhale, and I think I'm enjoying this summer a little bit more than I would have previous summers, only because, as you were sort of asking about before, Columbia ain't easy. There's a huge workload, as there is at Dartmouth and Rutgers, but when you have that and you add on to that the emotional stress of people chanting for Jews to leave America, for Jews to get killed right outside of your university's gates, and when you deal with that sort of emotional turmoil, the fact that there are people who are actually advocating for this right outside of my dorms, when you go to the library, when you go to dining halls, when you go to dorms, and Columbia being the sort of panopticon as it is, it's a small little university with a large green space right in the middle. That is the physical ground zero for where all these protests happened, where the encampment happened. Hamilton Hall was right in the middle of campus, which was taken over. And so wherever you are in Columbia, it's almost a reminder that there are these sort of frustrating individuals who are willing to escalate their rhetoric so much about their messaging behind wanting the elimination of the Jewish state. It's incredibly frustrating. And so having that constantly serve as a looming shadow over your academic experience, over your college experience, for the vast majority of your first year at Columbia, it is heavily frustrating, heavily difficult. And needless to say, I'm enjoying life outside of college. I would have pictured myself, me back in high school, I would have pictured myself, me being in college, like, oh, I never want to return home. Like, I want to stay in New York. Like, who cares about like Glenridge, New Jersey? But now, like, I love the suburbs. Now, like, I'm soaking in all my time here, and I'm hoping that things will improve at Columbia, but I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah. Well, I am hoping for you that when you return, you feel, and it seems like a long shot right now, that you feel a peace, a comfort, a safety in going to not only class, but the great Hungarian bakery at 112th in Amsterdam.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Oh, I love
exactly.
them. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and for all three of you, that's my wish for you, that you have a semester and many semesters of peace and safety on campus. Rabbi, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, so thank you. So I only have one question because we're committed to this being an hour-long conversation. And thank you for everyone for coming. And thank you for the three of you who are so articulate and wonderful.
Mhm.
Really. The question that I have is a bit of a selfish question, and which is, as you reflect back on your time at TNT, and each of you took religious school very seriously, went up through graduation. Um, what were some of the things that prepared you for this moment? And what could we do better for our future students to prepare them for this moment? Yeah, Nick.
I mean, I think I love TNT because it's a bit of a Jewish bubble where you are surrounded by those who connect to you on a personal level. When you're in a strong community where you really feel safe, where you really feel like you belong. And I think that's a strength, but that's an unfortunate weakness as well that TNT to a certain extent can't necessarily control. I mean, what's strong, what's beneficial about a bubble is that when you're in there, it's amazing, it's safe, it's great. But I think the weakness is obviously that the rest of the world is not like said bubble, and that you're going to encounter some very difficult, some very uncomfortable, and as I've experienced, in downright unsafe situations and circumstances. And so I guess there's the need to prepare on the one hand, and this goes for all education, all schooling, including religious schooling. One needs to prepare for the idea that they're going to encounter moments of intense disagreement, of intense conflict, and that there's the need to prepare oneself for how to manage the sort of disagreement. And so I guess the need to prepare students that, yes, this might be your reality on the college campus and beyond, as a matter of fact. I guess that might, I understand this, that would probably be a growing priority of religious schooling going forward.
Sophie and Jesse, do you have anything to add?
I mean, to build on Nick's point, I feel so incredibly lucky. The later parts of my Hebrew school years were me in a class with 8 other incredible, smart, articulate, thoughtful, kind women. And I mean, Rabbi Katz can speak to this too. We pushed back on every single thing you said, and we were very intent on questioning everything and wanting to wanting to come up with alternative explanations for everything, and then, hearing you out, hopefully respectfully, sort of why, sort of, yeah, to sort of fully grasp ideas as much as we could. And I'm very aware of the fact that my Hebrew school class was very unique in that way. We just kind of had a specific dynamic and a specific way that we all worked together to try to understand the world that I think may not be present in every single year, just by virtue of the students who happen to make it up. And I think that one thing that is maybe just important to keep in mind for teaching students moving forward is that I think that students are capable of engaging with complexity and want to engage with it. And I think that's one way that we can sort of prepare in a safe environment to have really difficult conversations, or to handle, um, yeah, just to handle the complexity that exists as you get older and are just exposed to new things and new people and new ideas. And so I think we always made this really active effort to seek out complexity, but I don't know, again, that that's characteristic of every single class. And so I think as a teacher, forcing students, maybe forcing is too strong a word, but encouraging students to engage with complexity and really understand what it is they believe and why is a thing that's really helpful going out into the world.
Good. Yeah, Jesse.
Yeah, I think a lot of what I took away from my like just religious education, just I guess like education in general at Ner Tamid was, I guess, not being afraid to not know everything. Sort of being okay with saying, "Oh, this is a little bit too complicated for me. I don't really have an answer for this." So if somebody asks me what my stance is on Israel, it's like, I can say this much. I could say I think that Israel should exist. I don't think it should be dismantled. That wouldn't end well for anybody. But I can't really elaborate further on that because I just don't know enough about it. And and I think being like that education at TNT sort of allowed me to be able to just sort of confidently say, I don't know enough to really have a fully fledged opinion on this, and that's okay. I don't need to know everything. And I'm really glad that I'm able to recognize that and not try to pretend like I know things that I really don't.
Thank you. So Nick, Jesse, Sophie, thank you. You can see, by the way, people are putting things in the chat. You should read what people are writing about you right now because this has been an incredible conversation. Bud, as always, thank you for your wonderful, insightful thoughts, comments, and questions. It's not just the questions you ask, but the way you ask it that always brings out the best in people. And thank you to the TNT Religious School Parent Committee who co-sponsored this and have many other plans for other great learnings for our community throughout the course of the coming year. And so thank you. This recording will be available on online sometime in the next couple days. And really, Sophie, Jesse, Nick, we are blessed, really blessed.
Yeah.
You are
You
the
are.
best of us, really, and we are
Yeah.
so happy to have you. So thank you.